Douglas Murray is a British author and journalist who writes for Standpoint and The Spectator, among many others, and in 2005 published Neoconservatism, Why We Need It. At the age of 20, he wrote actually a splendid biography of Lord Alfred Douglas, the friend of Oscar Wilde. He joins us now from London, England. Welcome to you, sir.
Very good to be with you.
That's a very general question, but I think most Canadians, most North Americans have a very generous, rather romantic view of Europe. But it's perhaps a Europe of the past, a Europe maybe even of masterpiece theatre. Europe is changing radically, and specifically I mean the size and the sometimes aggression of the Islamic minority within those particular countries. What future for Europe as North Americans think it?
Well, it's all to play for, I think. The strange thing has happened to Europe in recent decades, because at the same time as our countries have become less dour, less sort of monochrome, less impoverished as they were after the Second World War, they've also had to confront entirely new problems and entirely new issues. And one of the things about this is, as you say, a lot of Americans, a lot of Canadians and others follow British television and so on. They have this romantic idea of this sort of dreaming spires of Oxford, beautiful sites and so on. A lot of that's just simply changed. Mass immigration has changed Britain and Europe for the better in many ways, and also for the worse. And we end up in a very strange situation, I'd submit, where effectively, Europe doesn't know what it is anymore. It doesn't know why it exists, doesn't really know what it's about or what it's for. And I think that's going to change at some point soon, but whether that changes for the better or for the worse is anyone's guess.
It's a fascinating subject within a European context, because in North America, we've had to evolve. We've never had a very firm foundation in terms of ethnic identity. It's been relatively vague. But if I think of Europe standing up for something, what does it stand up for? Christianity is to a certain degree being expunged. Secular liberalism, tolerance, these are all very noble, but are people willing to fight for those? I'm quite pessimistic, actually.
Yeah, we might have a fight to the end, a photo finish in the pessimism stakes between you and me. Look, I mean, the fact is this, is that Europeans are willing to defend to the death everyone else's right to hate them. They are willing to protect and defend all values other than their own. And one of the reasons about that is that they don't really know what their own values are anymore. I'd put it like this. The strangest thing that's happened in European culture in the last 70 years is what the philosopher Roger Scruton described as a culture of self-abnegation, where you spend as much time as you can vilifying and distancing yourself from your own past, from your own culture, your own heritage, and spend as much time as possible lauding and praising any culture or heritage which is different. Now, I take it as read that all cultures have something to give, something of interest, and so on, but to so completely focus on the superiority of every other culture other than your own, it is a very peculiar and relatively modern European phenomenon. And I just give one example of this, which is that 10 years ago, or a little bit more than 10 years ago, let's say July 2001, most people in Europe knew nothing very much about Islam, didn't have any particularly strong views about it. And in the last 10 years, pretty much thanks to a worldwide epidemic of suicide bombing and so on, now everyone thinks that an expression of sort of cultural generosity, an expression of cultural decency, an expression of cultural sophistication is to be as up as possible on Islam. And I think that's one of the problems for Europe. It's a problem for everyone, that if effectively you can only celebrate other cultures, you'd never hear, by the way, any major broadcaster in Britain praising or doing a fawning documentary on Christianity. But, I mean, you wouldn't have any other type of documentary when it came to Islam. That's just an example of it, what I would think of as a kind of cultural cringe, which is now prevalent.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing for either an internal or external force to oppose the establishment, the status quo, and I think Islam is doing that to a certain degree. But it's another when those with influence seem to be self-hating. You mentioned the BBC. We've both done work for the BBC over the years. BBC Radio recently, I heard a documentary that it was quite nauseating. It was so anti-intellectual. It was interviewing a series of people who'd embraced Islam, generally people who weren't really formed Christians in Britain who had embraced Islam, and their reasons were entirely fatuous. But the interviewer drank them in as though they were incredibly profound. But you mentioned Roger Scruton. I mean, Roger Scruton became a Catholic. We think of people like Paul Johnson. We think of some East European and Italian philosophers who are Catholic, who have become Catholic. I'm not saying Catholicism is the answer, but they seem to be searching for something which is absolute, so they can stand up and say it's not just being European or white. That's not the issue. It's saying this is why we are not of the Islamic faith.
Yes, I don't think Roger Scruton is a Catholic. He describes himself as a believer in belief. He likes the belief, and I think his own belief sort of goes in and out like the wireless.
I thought he came into the Roman Catholic Church. Forgive me. I thought.
No, I mean, the point is that what he does is defends the principle, the idea, and the ideal of Western culture, and celebrates it, and believes that it has value. What is so interesting about the last decade has been that religion has become talked about again, but it's been talked about in an entirely foreign key. It's a very strange development. If you'd have said to somebody in 2000 that the first decade of the 21st century would be primarily obsessed with a discussion of religion, they'd have thought, what? Christianity? Haven't we seen the back of that? But actually they end up talking about a culture and a religion they know, or knew in the past, very little about. I think what is happening is, as I said, it's all to play for in this. But I would predict this, that if you are in a situation where you hate your own past, and are positively lascivious in your adoration of anyone else's past other than your own, then it can only spell trouble in the end. And let me give you one quick example. You mentioned the BBC. Not only in a program about Islam would you hear that kind of fawningness. Recently, the BBC ran a radio documentary about Anthony Blunt, the famous communist spy. And it came to the sort of conclusion that basically Blunt had been a victim of the British establishment. He'd sort of an outsider. He didn't fit in. All that kind of thing. No, the man was a communist spy who wanted to bring down the country that gave him succor and gave him a home. As I say, any country which continually wages war and assaults its own self and its own past can't come to any good.
And just this week, of course, we had the BBC apparently saying that the words BC and AD would not be used because they are so terribly offensive. I wish we had more time. Terrific stuff. Thank you so very much indeed.
Not at all. Good to be with you.